This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit. What do you guys want to talk about?
Back at it again, aren't we? Yes, we are. And boy, do we have stuff to talk about. I'm very relieved to know that my weekend does not look like it'll be as crammed as last week was. Thank God for small favors. Trying to record and upload the Friday podcast late, and then turning around and watching AEW Collision and the Money in the Bank special in less than a 12-hour window. That was rough. Luckily, the shows were halfway decent. Can't say the same about Dynamite this week, but, well, you all kind of know that theme by now. Even poor MJF was not enough to save the show this week. And you really know the show's bad at that point, when even MJF can't make the show worthwhile. I'll get into all that momentarily. I just want to do a couple housekeeping things real quick. You know, I've talked about going back and forth with the Dynamite thing for a while, trying to figure out how long I want to keep torturing myself with this Dead in the Water show. I figure for the sake of seeing what they lead up to for the All In show at Wembley, you know, since we're already close enough to the date, it would probably be worth it to just stick the course and at least get through the rest of August. I forget what the date for that show is. I think it's the 27th. Last I checked. I have no idea what the card's going to be for that show, or honestly how the streaming thing is even going to work. I'm still not entirely sure they're planning on running that as a pay-per-view event. Hopefully they give us clarification on that. But, you know, at least I'm giving myself a window. Because to be honest with you, man, I was already up late trying to watch this show on Thursday. I actually fell asleep and had to rewatch parts of the second hour the next morning because I was so tired. And the show didn't do me any favors in preserving my attention. I just don't know how much longer I want to keep doing that to myself. You know, it's already enough of a pain because of my work schedule to try and cram that show into my Thursday block right before I go to bed. You know, at least if we stick with the retro content, you know, we can still have a relatively fun Friday show. May even give me more time to elaborate on some of the studio shows with Crockett TV and some of the Dallas material. But we'll see. You know, I'm always open to adding another segment to replace the Dynamite Report. Doesn't really matter what I do, but definitely wouldn't be anything over an hour in runtime. And I would prefer sticking with the classic content, so no, don't ask me to watch Ring of Honor or Rampage again. That ain't happening. But since we're already in a jolly mood on the subject of good old AEW Dynamite, my favorite show of the week, why don't we go ahead and see what horrors await us on the other side this time? I think the real question is, how long is it going to take me to actually barrel through this one? Hopefully not long. Last week I watched the show live, so I was basically handcuffed into having to sit through the whole thing, as was my dad, for about the first hour. Out of pure curiosity, he wanted to see what all the hubbub was about. Told him he wasn't missing anything important, but he insisted. And he basically made it through the first hour before he tapped out and gave up. That was his first viewing of AEW, by the way. and what will more than likely be his last. Me, on the other hand, I still have no idea why the hell I'm still watching this show. Part of it's habit. In fact, a large part of it's habit. I've been watching these Dynamite programs so religiously for the last 2.5 years. It's almost sort of ingrained in me to just do it. This week, however, I exercised my advantage of the DVR function and made sure I fast-forwarded through all the bull crap. Last week was sort of the wake-up call that made me appreciate the fact that I had the luxury of being able to fast-forward through most of the show most weeks. Trying to watch live without the benefit of fast-forward, that nearly drove me into a feat of depression, the likes of which I haven't felt in years. So let's run down some of this card. The opener was one of those blind eliminator tag tournament dilly-bobs that Mark Booker Tony Khan decided to do for shits and giggles, because he's finally acknowledged the fact that, I really don't have a tag division anymore since we've either wasted all of our teams in that meaningless trios division that no one gives a crap about, or I broke up all the other teams I had for other asinine reasons. So fuck it. Let's just steal from the playbook at WCW and do one of those lethal lottery deals with random partners where the teams either don't get along and hate each other, or the partners make no rational sense and there's absolutely no rhyme or reason to care about them as a team. In this particular match, we kind of had the best of both worlds. Now, I ranted about the Keith Lee Swerve Strickland thing last week, so I'll save the breath of the full 10-minute tirade again. I will just simplify the conversation down to this. Somehow, I'm supposed to believe that these guys were conveniently paired together in a blind pick out of an entire roster of 300-something guys. The same two guys, mind you, that were tag partners at one point before they were split up for Christ knows what reason. We never actually saw the blow off to the singles feud because apparently all that shit took place on other shows that 80 people watch. Now they're back to being tag partners again because fractional math didn't work in their favor, I guess. Is that mostly right? I mean, the whole thing is beyond preposterous. And then there's Darby and the company mascot being paired together because Tony has a hard-on for Orange Cassidy and thinks he's a ratings draw when he's clearly not. And I guess Darby was the odd man out. That and the fact that Sting is still apparently dead after jumping off a 15-foot ladder last week and knocking out his front teeth during a botched table bump. Moron. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, you'll never guess what happened here. Rather than hold you in suspense, I'll just cut to the chase because no one gives a fuck about the match. Swerve and Keith mistimed a double team move, and then Darby stacked up Swerve with the Last Supper and got the pin. After which Keith gave a fist bump to Darby and Cassidy, making it abundantly obvious that he did not also give a fuck about this stupid tournament. Therefore, why should I? And for the record, I watched the match just to see if anything remotely interesting would have played out. Unsurprisingly, nothing important occurred. They did a bunch of indie moves for a while. That's more or less a summarization of the entire match. I also briefly skimmed over a pre-tape in the parking lot where Jungle Jackass showed up to try and act all tough and smug, now that he's playing heel on TV. And I know that's a cardinal sin to all the old-timers out there to use the word play to describe babyface and heel roles in wrestling. When it comes to Jack Perry, though, boy do I use that term deliberately. Because he is, at this point, pretending to be a bad guy. They tried him as an uninspiring, dull, fake-as-fuck babyface. That sunk like the Titanic on steroids. Now they're trying him as an uninspiring, dull, fake-as-fuck heel. And I would argue that this might even be worse. Because now he's blatantly trying way too hard. I don't believe anything the guy says or does. He sounds like he's sleepwalking through the delivery of everything. Just sounds like your run-of-the-mill heel promo you'd probably hear from a green rookie in NXT. It sounds forced, it sounds scripted, and you don't buy or believe anything that's coming out of the guy's mouth. And whereas Jungle Jackass might have gotten away with this in his first year in the business when he didn't have a lot of promo exposure, we're at the point now where I think the bloom's finally off the rose. 4 years into this fucking fiasco, the guy's still got the personality of drywall. And he ain't getting any better. And I'm sorry, but if Tony Khan is going to keep jamming this 4 pillars propaganda down my throat, and that Jungle Boy's supposed to be one of the poster children for it, I expect better. Even Darby's made astronomical progress on the stick, and I still think his promos are the drizzling shits too. Sammy Guevara, same thing. But Jungle Boy, dude. God, there's just no growth. There's no improvement with him. He's the same dry piece of raw meat he was 3.5 years ago when this company first started. I thought the heel switch was the right call. Now I've been suitably chastened. You can all admonish me in the comment section for having high hopes that turning Jack Perry heel was going to improve the quality of his speaking ability. I was wrong. Dead fucking wrong. And I will eat my words on that. And then we come to the real comedy of the show. How's this for a wind-up joke? This one would be perfect for stand-up at your local bar. So MJF and Adam Cole were at a gym. Stop right there. Read that sentence back. Figure out what doesn't add up in that statement. And I'm not making that up either. They actually filmed this skit as a pre-tape and aired it on Dynamite. Adam Cole and MJF met up at a gym. They're in training ahead of their blind eliminator tournament round for later on in the show. Now, of course, Max is waiting outside the gym entrance for Cole to show up, joking that going to the gym isn't exactly Adam Cole's thing, but he's been waiting for an hour. So, of course, right on cue, Cole just opens the main door and tells Max that he's been doing cardio for the last hour. Again, the jokes really do write themselves in these segments, don't they? But then comes the real punchline. Apparently their workout routine consists of 1 set each of chest presses using the barbells. That is the entire workout. Max does a rep with 3 plates. Couldn't tell what the weight was on it, but I don't know. I usually use dumbbells when I do my chest presses, so I'm not the best frame of reference, but they kind of look like your standard 45-pound plates. Didn't look like anything out of the ordinary for MJF to press. And, they're doing comedy bits where they're both supposed to spar for each other, but Adam's on his phone, not paying attention, and then MJF was looking off into space and not focusing when Cole was doing his reps. But of course, I'm neglecting to talk about the ridiculousness of the whole sketch. The fact that Adam Cole was pressing the same amount of weight as MJF was. First of all, fuck off. Second of all, can someone please explain to me what the hell was going on with that camera work? What kind of voodoo witchcraft bullshittery was that? Am I the only one that noticed when MJF was doing his reps they made sure to focus the camera on the fact that Max was clearly pressing all that weight. Then when it was Adam Cole's turn, they like zoomed the camera all the way in to the point where you couldn't even see him in the frame. Actually, here's what you saw. The entirety of MJF's body, Adam Cole's hands, the barbell handle, and maybe like one plate on each side. And what the fuck was going on with the angle of the handle? Watch it back. I'm not shitting you. When Cole goes to press the weights, did anybody else see that it looked like he was benching at an angle? Did you notice how the barbell handle wasn't going straight up and down? It looked like Cole's entire body weight was shifting itself to the left. Like gravity had just rotated itself to like a 120-degree angle. Am I the only one that saw that, or am I just hallucinating? I don't do drugs when I watch the show. I've contemplated it a time or two, but I was sober. I saw this right in front of my eyes. I mean, Lord knows I ever pay more attention to the show than absolutely necessary, but even I saw that. I mean, whatever. The whole thing was beyond ridiculous already. You know, Cole and MJF are joking about a fat guy working out. And hey, you know what? I'll defend him. At least that motherfucker was showing up. Y'all know how many fat, out-of-shape slogs I run into in my day-to-day life outside in public spaces? People that have probably never even sniffed the inside of a Planet Fitness. I actually admire seeing overweight people at the gym. You know, especially the ones that are there as often as I am. Those are the ones that you know are actually attempting to do the work. Now, I know that guy was more than likely a plant, but the point is, don't make fun of fat people at the gym. I'm all for having a sense of humor. Fat jokes are always funny, but I mean, give those people credit, man. But seriously, this was terrible. And not even like comically terrible to the point where I could overlook it and get entertainment value out of it. No, this was just stupid and hokey for the sake of being stupid and hokey. This is a Raw segment. You know, if they really wanted to rib me and get me to like it, what they should have done is they should have kept the first 20 seconds when MJF was standing outside the front entrance, and when Cole opens the door and says, "Where have you been, man? I've been doing cardio for an hour." Cut it. Done. The segment's over. Or just have Cole walk up and look at the sign and go, "Oh, I see. So this is where I'm supposed to go to get into better shape, right?" Huh. Interesting. I mean, at least you're playing into what everybody subconsciously already knows. Anyway, let's move on with this fiasco. They had a random six-man tag with the Acclaimed beating the Blade and the Bollywood Boys. Okay. Fine. Should have been a lot shorter. I have no idea why they put this through a commercial break. Or why the Acclaimed were selling for a makeshift team that we've never seen team before. But hey, they got 2 hours to kill. So every match evidently needs to go 10 hours longer than necessary. I also have no clue what was going on with that blonde chick that's part of QT's gang of misfits. I'm still trying to figure out what the fuck that accent's supposed to be. I don't think I've ever seen somebody randomly go between an Australian and a Canadian accent in one sentence. You know, but then again, I don't really hang out with too many Canadians or Australians anyway. But in completely unrelated news, and actually this is the real comedy moment of the show this week, we found out who Matt Hardy's tag partner is going to be in the Blind Eliminator tournament. His partner will be Jeff. But not Jeff Hardy. Jeff Jarrett. No, that wasn't the funny part. The funny part was when Matt was walking off camera and he mumbles under his breath, and I quote, "I hate Jeff Jarrett." And I think it was the emphasis on hate that put it over the top for me. He didn't say, "Man, I hate Jeff Jarrett." He said, "I hate Jeff Jarrett." Now that is true passion. That is a loathing kind of reaction. And now Matt feels the pain of every wrestling fan that's watched since the mid-90s and can never catch a break from having to watch slab nuts get pounded down our throats in multiple wrestling organizations, including this fucking one. God damn it. At least he's not teaming with Mark Briscoe. Speaking of people getting rammed and pounded down our throats, here comes Chris Jericho for a promo. And he's here to inform us that he's retiring. No, I'm just kidding. That was just wishful thinking on my part. No, rather he said that he is reinvigorated. Oh, goody. Just what I needed to hear. Another reinvigorated Chris Jericho story where he contemplates how he wants to go about reinventing his career. Try to figure out his 57th gimmick in the last 3 years alone. And of course, there's no better place to reinvent himself than Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Yeah, there's another good joke for you. I want to reinvent my career in Canada, of all places. Sounds like a wonderful time in that communist-run hellhole. But of course, who should be out to interrupt Chris? For God knows what reason. But Don Callis. Well, we actually found out the reason Don Callis was out there. He wants Jericho to be a member of his new family. Moreover, the latest installment of AEW Faction number 428. A faction that currently comprises of, I think, just Don Callis and Take a Shitter, right? Since he's the one managing him right now. I guess that would make Jericho an awkward third wheel, should he agree to join. Now, of course, the biggest question in all this is, who could possibly care? The answer is no one. We all know what happens anytime Jericho rubs off on people in this company. Anybody that gets done working a program with him never comes out on the other end better. I have no idea what the hell a Don Callis-led heel faction is supposed to accomplish, but honestly, I'm also yet to figure out what any AEW faction has ever accomplished. Most of the time, it's just sticking random people in groups because you have way too many goddamn people to fit in on these shows. So the go-to is just to cram as many bodies on the show as humanly possible. Ergo, wedge everybody into a faction. That'll get them screen time. But I'll be honest, I kind of tuned a lot of this out. I had it on in the background. I got bits and pieces, but I mean, am I missing any detail that was important? Callis wants to recruit Jericho because reasons. And Jericho might join, but he's not sure because reasons. And I don't give a fuck because reasons. And then we got back-to-back promo packages for Punk versus Joe and Hobbs versus Starks for Collision on Saturday. Two matches that have actually been given reason to care about, and I'm genuinely looking forward to watching. Especially Joe versus Punk. I want to see what they book for a finish there. At least they booked an angle for Joe and Punk on the Collision show last week to give it some flavor. I wish they would have talked a little more about the history with Hobbs and Stark, since that feud's been barely acknowledged since the last time those guys fought. That was months ago, too. But maybe they'll throw together some kind of package on the Saturday show. But I think they should have stayed on that a little longer. In the meantime, I guess we can talk about our top of the hour match. It's MJF and Adam Cole in their Blind Eliminator tournament round against the stellar duo of Mini Dick Matt Menard and the Butcher. Yes, that was the hand-selected job team they fed to Cole and MJF here in the top of the hour slot on Dynamite. Matt Menard and the Butcher. I can just see that ratings pop immediately. And, fuck it. I'm not afraid to say the quiet part out loud. This is one of the worst MJF matches I've ever seen. This was right up there with the kinds of bad comedy he was getting sucked into during that Chris Jericho feud a couple years ago. Now, of course, the idea is that MJF is yucking up the goofiness and trying to make friends with Cole, and Cole's not buying it. But he's still willing to go along with MJF's antics because, I don't know. I guess he's that desperate to hold championship gold in AEW, even if it has to be holding one half of the tag belts with a guy he avidly hates. So be it. At least he can call himself a champ. Meanwhile, the other champion in this match, the AEW World Champion, is doing mid-card level comedy in the middle of their flagship show. Because their Mark Booker is a moron and has no idea what he's doing. So with that out of the way, let's talk about some of the stupid shit that happened in this match. They did a fake abdominal stretch spot with MJF and Mini Dick Menard, where Max kept asking Cole to illegally pull on his wrist from the ring apron behind the ref's back. This bit went on for almost a full minute, and it was absurd watching Matt pretend like he was in pain while MJF was barely even applying pressure. When they came back from picture-in-picture, I was watching the heel jobbers get heat on MJF, who, did I mention, is their world fucking champion. Right. Because you all remember that time on the Saturday Superstation when Ric Flair was getting worked over by Vernon Deaton and Lee Peak, right? And Flair had to make a desperate reach out to his partner Ronnie Garvin so he could come in and make the babyface comeback. Oh, what's that? Oh, you don't remember that happening? Oh, of course. Well, silly me. I forgot. Dusty. Of course he wouldn't have been stupid enough to book something as idiotic like that back in the day. Because unlike Tony Khan, Dusty actually had two brain cells he'd rub together on occasion. So anyway, Adam Cole got the hot tag and made a sloppy comeback at the end. He hit a million thigh slap kicks and then pinned Matt Mini Dick with a boom. After MJF kept calling him to tag him so they could do a double clothesline spot. So I'm guessing that'll be the ultimate payoff when they win the finals and end up becoming number one contenders for the belts. They're going to use the double clothesline spot as a finish. And people will cheer for it because they'll claim great long-term storytelling. Oh, but we're not done there. No, you see, it is a special occasion on Dynamite this week, as it is Adam Cole's birthday. Which means that, in this already overplayed comedy segment, what we really needed more of is more comedy, of course. So here comes the confetti and the cake and the indie-looking partygoers. One guy had a balloon wedged into the back of his pants. And, they did some really stagey WWE sports entertainment garbage until the blow-off at the end was Max trying to shove Adam's face into the cake. But swerve! Adam reversed it, and he threw Max's face into the cake. And then in very creepy-like fashion, Cole wiped off some of the frosting from MJF's face and then licked it with his finger. And he wanted to thank Max for going out of his way to do all these party favors. And then he called him friend. And at that point, I half expected Cole to kiss MJF on the cheek to really turn this segment gay. You know, that way we could maybe entertain the idea of the love triangle dynamic with Britt getting involved. And we could really kick this fucking story into a higher gear. The love affair relationship with MJF, Adam Cole, and Britt Baker. Who wins Adam Cole's heart out in the long haul? Did Britt buy Adam Cole a fucking cake? I think not. And you know he's going to hold that one over on her. They live together. Next time they have their big argument, you know that's the first thing Cole's going to bring up in the conversation. Hey, you know, babe, MJF, yeah, he's kind of a douchebag, but, I mean, he bought me a cake for my birthday. All you got me was a 20% discount off my next haircut appointment. Now, if I actually thought Tony were smart enough to go that direction of the love affair triangle, well, then I could just stop giving two shits entirely about how rotten this storyline is and just laugh at the sheer lunacy of it. Right now, I'm conflicted. Because I know how awful this is. It sucks a hard cock. It makes no sense. And yet, I still can't find ways to seek entertainment out of it. Because it just flat out sucks. So anyway, what the hell happened next? My notes are all over the place. Oh, yeah, that's right. I think this is where I fell asleep and had to rewatch chunks of the second hour the next morning. Turns out I really didn't miss much of note. Britt Baker and Ruby No-Go had their Owen Hart tournament quarterfinal round. It went a while. It was bad. The crowd didn't care. And after about 40 different run-in angles from the Outcasts, in addition to Britt going full-fledged Hulk Hogan mode and managing to fight 3 girls off by herself, the finish was Ruby pinning Britt with an O'Connor roll. And again, I remind you, one of the girls in that faction on the floor, helping Ruby cheat during this match, she's their world champion. Just thought I'd throw that out there for the record in case you forgot. But yeah, Toni Storm, their alleged top athlete in the division. Just one of the random lumberjacks at ringside. Just a geek, hanging out, getting laid out by Britt. Ridiculous. And you know, I was thinking about something recently. Honestly, I don't even know if I want to talk about it now, but every time I see AEW book one of these girl segments, I just keep thinking, there's got to be a more effective way to feature the girls on Dynamite, because clearly, booking them in matches and angles and promos, it's not doing them any favors. And it's not just Dynamite, it's every AEW program. Collision, Rampage, the pay-per-views. It's all a disaster. And then a thought occurred to me. You know, WCW used to have the Nitro Girls. Remember how they used to come out and do a little dance routine on the show a couple times every week? Just kind of break up the flow of the program. Maybe they were on screen for a combined total of 45, 60 seconds. They were all highly attractive women with great bodies and were extremely athletic. The people loved them. They got a big pop. I'm wondering how much better mileage AEW would get if they considered doing something like that. You can't tell me that out of an entire roster of 70-something girls, you can't find one of them that were ever on a dance team at any point? Not one of them did gymnastics when they were in high school? I don't believe that. I don't know. It hit me one week while I was watching, though. I think it actually might have been last week when I was watching that Ruby squash, where I was like, man, AEW could really benefit from having some Dynamite girls. Just have them come out like 2 or 3 times during the show, do a 30-second performance, let all the horny men admire their bodies, and just move on to shit that people would actually be interested in seeing. Because here's the one universal thing that myself and even the AEW hardcores can acknowledge. I don't have much in common with them, but I will agree with the vast majority when I say, with very, very scarce exceptions to the conversation, even the AEW diehards will tell you that the women's segments are death TV for AEW's ratings. They might play along and watch, but 80% of those people could not give a fuck less about the girls wrestling on this show. It certainly reflects in the TV ratings. I know they think they might have to appeal to the SJWs of the world and give women their fair shake or whatever the bullshit notion is these days. You know, Tony thinks he's obligated to appeal to the 0.05% of the market that actually wants to see sloppy indie girls wrestling every week on primetime cable TV. But for how long? Really, I think that's the question. How long are they going to keep riding that train? Haven't we already established that this formula is not working? Nothing about the girls' division in AEW has changed in the last 3 years. They've maybe snatched up 1 or 2 moderately decent athletes from WWE compared to when they first started. But what are they doing with them? That's the problem. I keep hearing people rave about how great Toni Storm is. Cool. I haven't seen that in AEW. Most of the time I see her nearly crippling girls with that running hip attack in the corner where it looks like the ones taking it are breaking their necks. Saraya's been a complete waste of time, energy, and money. Britt Baker's no better now than when she was when she cut that heel promo like 2 or 3 years ago. She hit her peak back then. I'm not going to run down the entire roster. I don't have another hour. But you know what? People are really afraid to have this conversation. There are very few wrestling fans out there that are willing to go there. And you know what? I'll be one of the first to forefront that conversation. Let me lead it. If people want to jump on board and get behind me on it, I'll take the heat. Because if no one else is going to have the balls to step up and say that we need to acknowledge the fact that there probably does not need to be a women's division in AEW because most of them are the fucking shits and everybody knows it. If that makes me a misogynist, because I prefer to see half-naked pretty women doing sexy dance routines instead of mid-looking women have bad professional wrestling matches every week on TV, fine. Whatever. It's not the first time someone would have called me a horrible person. Maybe, just maybe, I just want to see shit that's good instead of shit that's bad. Is that too much to ask? Call me crazy. Speaking of bad shit, TV main event this week. For 15 minutes, I watched Kenny Omega have a competitive back and forth match with, of all people, Flat Wheel Yuta. Yuta. Are you kidding me? They couldn't even have fucking Claudio work this match and at least make it look somewhat visually impressive. At least Claudio and Omega look like athletes. Maybe Claudio would have been able to get something halfway decent out of Omega for a change. But no. Instead, they went with a guy that looks like a shift supervisor at IKEA. Here's basically everything you need to know about the match, because I'm not going to spend 20 minutes breaking it down. They did a bunch of video game moves for a while, kicked out of everything under the sun. This company continues to try and make Wheeler Yuta a thing, and it gets more and more infuriating the more I see of it. And it all built to a spot where Don Callis and Takeshita tried to do run-in distractions at the end. And their idea for this distraction spot was to have Takeshita run in from the back door, grab Kenny Omega by his penis, and then spin him around to hit him with a Blue Thunder Bomb. I'm not kidding. That is what actually happened. Takeshita ran him from behind. He reached underneath to grab Omega by the crotch, and then he spun him around and gave him a Blue Thunder Bomb. At which point, Kenny Omega got a boner. And then Yuta came down and hit him with a frog splash. 2 count, by the way. Yeah, that running, just literally done for no reason. Just throwing it in there just to have an angle for the sake of having an angle. And then eventually Omega just hit Yuta with a one-winged angel a minute later and pinned him. And that was the point where the rest of the BCC goons came out and attacked Omega after the bell. And all you need to know is because of the people running this sinking ship, they have no sense of time management. So they try to cram in about 2 minutes worth of angles into about 45 seconds left of airtime. So I can't even really break down all that happened because my DVR cut out before I had a chance to see everything unfold. The last thing I saw was Adam Page tease he was going to hit Claudio with a chair, and then 3 random geeks came down to stop him. At first I thought they were marks that just jumped the barricade, and then I realized one of them was a short, bulky, bald guy. So I figured that was John Silver and the rest of the job order. The point is, this all sucked a wet dick. Much like the whole show did. But you already kind of know that to be the case most weeks. Like I said at the beginning, man, at this point, watching the show, I'm kind of on autopilot mode. I sit down Thursday night, I watch the program, take some notes, I report on the garbage I see the next morning. It's pretty much all there is to it. The show continues to be a textbook example of what happens when you let the inmates run the asylum and there's no one around to filter out all the bad shit. But this is the world Tony's created for himself. He made that bed, so now he has to sleep in it. Meanwhile, the graphics they showed for the Collision show this weekend look pretty promising. I get to see Punk wrestle. I get to see FTR wrestle. For me, that's about all I need at this point. Just give me those guys in matches and segments every week. Maybe you sprinkle in an MJF match occasionally when he decides to knock out all the bad hokey stuff. That'd be enough for me. I'm a very simple person. Just give me good professional-looking material that comes off serious and doesn't insult my intelligence. That's all I ask for as a fan. So far, Collision's done a better job of that in 3 weeks than Dynamite has in the last 3 years of existence. It's amazing how that works. And then there's Crockett TV. And how about that? We just covered the July 4th Retro Raw from 1994 this past week. Now we're turning around in 1987 and covering this episode of Crockett TV, also from July 4th. And to think people ever took off for the holidays. Non-pro wrestling, they didn't. No, sir. That was the real definition of hashtag no days off. Now, of course, during this month, there weren't many days off, period. Because this is the Bash Tour. All throughout the month of July, these boys are traveling from city to city, working multiple shows, virtually every night of the week. Cornette's deep dive on the Crockett promotions from 87 to 88. It's such a fascinating discussion. Covering a lot of the Bash Tour time frame and going over the logistics about the hectic schedule, how they traveled to various towns and how the road schedule was completely fucked up. It's crazy. Like, one night they would be in Greensboro, and then the following night they would be traveling down to one of the Florida towns, only to then have to travel back up north to somewhere like North Carolina the next day. It's just like everything was so sporadic, and there was no consistency to the road schedule at all. It was an exciting time for the fans, though. For the boys, and depending on how much they hated travel, I can only imagine how miserable of a time it was. You know, sitting in those cars, those long hours, and traveling from town to town with barely any chance to sleep, eat, or take a shit. That's the road life. It'll kill you. Anyway, getting back on track, the July 4th date was also important for this period in the business, because it was kind of a milestone date. It was also the day where the first ever Wargames match took place in the Omni in Atlanta. Now, obviously, this was taped before that match happened, so this is the last chance to sell that before the big showdown later in the evening. Also, in completely unrelated news that I don't think anybody could have possibly cared about, outside a handful of people that were living in Amarillo, Texas, of all places, Barry Windham is the new Western States Heavyweight Champion. Yeah, that was about my reaction too. Who cares? Tony claimed it was one of the most sought-after championships across the entire country right now. Said that every top star is gunning for it. Guarantee that was a bull-faced lie. If anybody could name the 3 previous Western States heavyweight champion in the Amarillo territory before Barry Windham, without using Google to look it up, I will give you $100. He threw out a couple other bullet points there, but that was the gist of his dialogue. And then we went to the ring for our opening TV bout this week. I believe our first official sighting on the Saturday Night Superstation for Ron Simmons. He wrestled Larry Stevens here. Now, this was not technically the in-ring debut for Ron Simmons in the NWA. Now, he had actually been around for the previous year, mostly working underneath squashes in Memphis. Haven't seen much of him, since he was obviously new and very green by this point in his career. I'm sure most people are well aware of his professional football career. This was still during the period in the business where promoters were scouting for collegiate-level athletes and bringing in a lot of bigger, jacked-up guys that took part in sports earlier in their lives. You know, seeing how they translated to the wrestling market, and as we saw throughout the course of history, some of them flourished, others not so much. Ron Simmons, Dr. Death Steve Williams, like those guys were just coming up the pike in the mid to late 80s. You know, they obviously came into their own later on. You watch this match here, and I mean, it's definitely not the Ron Simmons that was drinking beer and playing poker with Bradshaw in the locker room in the WWF, or walking around with the Nation of Domination. Christ, we haven't even entered the Doom era. That was like, what, 89? You know, but we always talk about how hindsight is 20/20. If you were watching this in real time back in 1987, how many people out there would have ever guessed that by 1992, this same Ron Simmons would end up becoming their world heavyweight champion? That's 5 years out. And I know that might seem like an eternity for a lot of people, but 5 years really isn't all that much time. You know, once they sort of established him as a regular on Crockett TV, that rocket ship push almost took off immediately. And again, it took Ron a little while to settle in. That run from 86, 87, even 88. Ugh. It wasn't a pretty sight. The guy had a lot of potential, though. You saw there was something there. He had the body, he had the intensity, he had the attitude. You know, but some of those tools took a lot longer to mold than others. The promo ability came a little later on. The ring work, That was rough around the edges for a few years. But seeing Ron here work the opening match on Crockett TV in the middle of 1987, I mean, I hate using analogies as my go-to, but he was a puppy with big paws. You knew he was going to be a big deal. Just trying to learn how all that would facilitate later on, that was always the question. But he went over with this he went over in this match with something resembling a tackle, preceded by other moves that I would also consider tackles. I told you he was green. What do you want from me? From there, we went over to the booth for a Dusty promo. And again, he's one of the 10 participants in the Wargames match later that night. So he's out there to plug it one more time and talk about how everybody's in training for the fight of the century. And, well, here's basically what happened. Up until the last 30 or so seconds, per Dusty standards, it was a very comprehensible promo. He was saying shit that landed. I could actually write it down on paper and translate it into words. War Games, everybody's getting ready. It's going to be the fight of a lifetime. All right, great. I understood that. And then he proceeded to talk about the match with Tully in Greensboro. He wants his $100,000 back. That's already been well established. At which point he then dovetails into a tirade about how he better keep his brown sugar away from him, or else Dusty's going to steal her away from him and do God knows what to her. This was already starting to become very unsettling. And then it totally went off the rails as Dusty began running down a bunch of random Middle Eastern cities that had nothing to do with anything. He's talking about Istanbul, Israel, Jerusalem, Bangkok. Of course, Dusty had to make sure he mentioned Bangkok. I have no idea what any of that meant. I'm just kind of convinced that Dusty was looking for an excuse to say the word cock on television. The last minute of this promo was just quicksand. Speaking of brown sugar, though, she was out next with Tully for a promo. I'm referring to Dark Journey, for anybody wondering, by the way. Don't worry. She's only around for like another month before she vanishes and is never seen again. If you're a wrestling fan that has no memories of Dark Journey, I can't fault you for it. She was the quintessential definition of somebody that was around for a cup of coffee. She vanished, never resurfaces again, and you never hear about her again. A quick one and done type deal. But this promo was about Tully hyping up War Games and talking about all the brutal, nefarious things that the Horsemen are going to do to the babyfaces. I believe he said that Luger is going to bend Animal's arm back and twist it around his knee. Meanwhile, Flair is going to take Hawk's arm and bend it like a pretzel to wrap it around his foot and jam it up his ass. And I think Arn's just going to smash people's heads into the cage. This is apparently their game plan of how they're going to take down the Road Warriors, Nikita and Dusty. Two of the wrestlers are going to use scientific technical holds. One of the guys is just going to mangle everybody's face into the cage. And I don't know what Tully and JJ are going to do. Maybe watch from the corner and contribute where necessary. I'm starting to think this might not be the best game plan. Perhaps a plan B would be in order for the Horsemen. Maybe something that was more bulletproof. I did love Tully's closing line here, though. This is epic. Tully says that he's going to get the last laugh when he comes down from the top rope onto Dusty's injured knee. And after he smashes it into pieces, Dusty will then have no choice but to scream the following: "I quit! The Horsemen are the best! The Horsemen are the best!" Have I ever mentioned how fucking great Tully was? I think we need to devote 2 minutes of the show every week for a designated Mark Out for Tully segment. He's the man. Then Lex Luger wrestled David Isley. It was about midway through the match where David Crockett joined up with Tony at the booth. He had been down at the Omni earlier, saying that he was prepping for the Bash Tour event, mainly overseeing the setup for the Wargames match. The cages have been set, and boy is David excited. He's ready to see some bodies hit the floor. Meanwhile, out on the floor during this match, JJ standing there, mainly spending most of the match trying to dig his ring trunks from out of his ass crack. A visual that I did not need to see captured on camera. But I guarantee you that was a rib on Dusty's part. He was probably looking at the monitors and said, "Look at that dope, picking at his ass. Put the camera on him, Daddy, put the camera on him. Let's watch JJ pick at his ass crack." Anyway, this is the longest, most boring squash of all time. Luger beat him up forever and finally won with the rack. And then Barry Windham was out for his weekly Nothing to Write Home About promo. Words were said. I didn't catch most of it because the crowd was cheering for the Rock and Roll Express, who were already in the ring getting ready to wrestle. I think he said he was going to be some kind of outside enforcer for the barbed wire match with Dusty and Tully. And his main point was, I don't really understand why they need a special enforcer when the barbed wire should already be enough to keep the Horsemen out of the ring. Point taken. Then we cut to the ring for Ricky and Robert versus David Diamond and Terry Jones. Robert Gibson now back from his random one-week TV hiatus. And I think he may now be regretting that hiatus. In all my years of watching wrestling, I can probably count on one hand the amount of guys that I have seen royally fuck up the headlock takeover spot. I have no idea how Gibson managed to do it. But he somehow found a way to mess up a headlock takeover. He grabbed Jones by his neck, and he just sort of let go and forgot to turn him over. And Jones just kind of fell to the mat. I guess everybody had their off days. Beyond that, though, the Rock and Roll hit some moves and then won with a double drop kick. I have literally nothing else to say about it. Then we came back for Arn Anderson versus Dexter Westcott. My first thought when they flashed up the graphic on the screen, am I having an amnesia moment? Or did we not just see this exact match last week? For whatever reason, I remember having a 20-second conversation bearing the horrible ring gear that Westcott was wearing, and I seem to recall that taking place during an Arn Anderson squash. Maybe it was somebody else. I know for a fact that Westcott was still wearing the same horrible ring gear. The urine-colored singlet and the boots. You'll never forget that visual. Piss yellow. That's what I call it. Crayola should have come up with that color. Of all the obscure colors in those random boxes of crayons, they never came up with urine yellow or piss yellow. In any case, Arn beat the shit out of him. 5 seconds into the opening bell, Arn dumps Westcott out to the floor and begins rubbing his face onto the concrete, after which he rolls him back in the ring and does the same thing while shouting at David Crockett. Phew. Not sure what bug was crawling up Arn's ass this week, but he was pissed about something here. I did note with the concrete spot. Remember when the Horsemen did that exact same thing to Ricky Morton on TV last year? And Ricky was walking around with a face guard for like the entire length of the summer? Here, Arn just does it to a random jobber on TV. And they just proceed with the match as such. Anyway, Arn hit a big double A spine buster. And then after some more trash talking, he planted Dexter with a gourd buster for the 3. At which point, during the execution of the gourd buster, David Crockett, point blank, said the following word. Yes. Just like that. No tonal inflection, no excitement, just dryly saying, yes. I laughed. It's always the small stuff that gets me with this show. My God, is it hot in this studio right now. I have the air conditioning on. I don't know why it's so goddamn hot. 1 second. I don't think I've ever done this before, but I have to. I'm taking my jacket off. So anyway, we came back from break for a Paul Ellering promo. And my God, this promo. Well, he's also gearing up for Wargames, as he will also be one of the featured 10 participants. Says that Hawk and Animal are getting ready for Wargames at the Omni, but Ellering is at the studio for a little tune-up match. However, not before sharing a very obscure story about a cat that used to chase the mouse around the home, saying that the cat isn't dumb enough to climb up and go after the mouse when he's hiding under the hot stove burner, but he's also not dumb enough to touch a cold burner either. Your guess is as good as mine. I have no idea what the fuck any of this had to do with Wargames. But his main point is, all animals are equal, but some are less equal than others. So in other words, no, not all animals are equal. Yeah, I don't know. I got nothing. I tried. I went back and rewatched that promo 4 times. I still had no idea what the hell that guy was talking about. Which made me that much more angry when I wasted almost 5 minutes going back to rewatch a nonsensical promo, just to turn around and have to watch a Barry Windham versus El Negro squash. It's almost mind-boggling to think of how they came up with some of these studio squashes back in the day. It's like when I used to watch all those old Nitros from the late 90s. You got like 200-something guys under contract to use in a 2-hour window, which meant more often than not, you get the most random pairing between guys to work TV matches, even if they had no chemistry together. That's what it's like watching some of these squashes on Crockett TV. Somebody thought, hey, I've got an idea. How about Barry Windham versus El Negro? Who actually thought that would have been a good pairing? I don't even care the match went 90 seconds. It was still ungodly horrible. It was so bad, Barry couldn't even execute his finishing lariat on this bumbling buffoon without fucking it up. He goes for the lariat, and El Negro mistimes it so badly, by the time he hits the ropes and runs back, when Barry turns around, Negro is already 2/3 of the way across the ring. So all Barry can basically do is just throw out his right hand to kind of sort of punch him in the jaw. It was terrible. For the record, too, I'm watching a lot of this footage again with fresh eyes. I remember Barry's run in '87 vaguely. The matches with Flair, I mean, those are the obvious standouts when I went back and saw things years later. The stuff with Ronnie Garvin, when they were the U.S. Tag Champs. I remember some of the stuff they did with Barry when he came in as a babyface. But the more I see of this initial face run, I think I'm starting to see why they were quick to turn him heel a year later. Because this babyface run, it's not doing him a whole lot of favors right now. He's totally plateaued since the Crockett Cup. He's just a guy on the show right now. currently the holder of a regional belt that no one could possibly care about. Totally directionless. I mean, this guy needed to turn heel in the worst way possible. And it took him 8 months before they finally pulled the trigger on this. Because I'm now realizing that we still have like another 6 months before they finally do the turn. I'm already over the Barry Windham babyface run. Going back to the booth, though, we got Ric Flair out for his designated Wargames plug segment. And he probably did the best job of anybody else on the show. Certainly did better than Paul Ellering, who was out there blabbing on about pussycats, as Flair referred to. And he wasn't entirely off base. He says the Horsemen are the 4 lions in this equation. There ain't no pussies in that group. He says that if you don't like blood, if you don't like guts, and you don't like violence, then you shouldn't watch War Games, because it's going to be a bloodbath. At which point, off in the distance, I could hear Jon Moxley jerking himself off in his bedroom at the thought of it. Blood, guts, and violence. And it's right up his wheelhouse. By the way, side note. Was Jon Moxley on Dynamite this week? I know the BCC did that run-in at the very end of the show, but was Moxley factored into that equation? Because I don't remember seeing him. Maybe I just missed it off camera, but yeah, I don't know what was going on there. Not that I'm complaining. I mean, the less of Jon Moxley I have to see, the better. But it was just something that stood out to me. Anyway, so this promo. Yeah, I mean, it was a Flair promo. The only thing missing here was him talking about eating the blood and drinking the bones and fucking the bodies. Mox would have had a field day at that. He'd have been calling this the greatest promo of all time. But we weren't done there, because Flair's also got his sights set on other matters, up to and including gorgeous Jimmy Garvin. Last week, we established that it'll be Flair versus Garvin for the title, but we have the added stipulation that if Flair wins, Precious will be forced to serve as Flair's personal for an evening. And while we already covered the stupidity of that whole deal, the idea that Garvin would be dumb enough to sacrifice his own wife for a fucking title match, well, Flair certainly likes the idea of it. And he makes it clear that after he beats Garvin, Precious will be coming home with Daddy. At which point, and I'm not making this up in the slightest, Ric Flair basically started talking about the porn films he was going to be making with Precious. Not kidding. That's basically what he said. He said, we're going to film the entire night. He's going to make Precious wear pink lingerie. He's going to get her under the silk sheets and go to town. And the last thing Precious will say is, please get me off of this mountain. Woo! Need I remind you, by the way, the fans were cheering for this. They are cheering for a man that is openly attesting to committing, at the very worst, rape, sexual assault, with another man's wife, no less. And these studio fans couldn't be any happier. The ladies are like, man, I wish Flair would do that to me. I want to ride Space Mountain with the Nature Boy. Fuck Precious. She gets all the good stuff. Only in wrestling, man. That's all I can say. Only in wrestling you can get away with that. Oh, I almost forgot. Tony's reaction, too. Just shakes his head and says, don't go away. We'll be right back. He does not give a shit about the safety of Jimmy Garvin's wife. He's like, oh, well, we got advertisers to sell to. And then we come back for the next match. As God is my witness, I'm not making this up. Completely unadvertised, no build to this at all, just randomly shoehorned into the middle of the show. Mike Rotunda versus Dory Funk Jr. Rotunda, the current reigning Florida State's heavyweight champion, and the Dory Funk Jr., obviously whose credentials are too numerous to put over in one sitting, second longest reigning NWA World Heavyweight Champion after Lou Thez, obviously coming from a good family lineage, that's second to none. Yeah, they just casually threw this one out there on TV. Totally at random with no hype or advertisement. I thought it was a rib. I was like, what the fuck? Where did this match come from? I mean, Rotunda had already been MIA from TV for a while anyway. Funk, I mean, to my recollection, I think he was jumping around to various locations in the 80s. And I'd have to do some research to see where he was prior to coming here. Probably still working the Mid-Atlantic area sporadically, but considering Rotunda was in Florida during this period, I'd imagine Dory was probably down there working a program with him at the time, and they just kind of brought it up here to Atlanta, film it on a studio show. It was a great TV match. Very old school, traditional, technical style match. They even let it run through a commercial, so it had room to breathe. It started off very back and forth in the opening minutes, but as things progressed in the match, Dory would resort to using heel tactics behind Teddy's back to get the upper hand. That gave the fans a clear-cut guy to boo and cheer, now that they knew Dory was trying to cheat. And they came back from break with Rotunda trying to pick up the intensity, going on offense. Somewhere during that, blood started running down Rotunda's arm. So at first I thought maybe he got cut open. And then moments later, I saw Dory's forehead. And he's gushing blood from the top of his head. No idea what happened, but it was a gnarly laceration. Fans are chanting, "Give it up, Dory, give it up." I don't think I've ever heard that chant in my entire life. I've heard some very interesting chants from the studio fans. That one I don't think I've heard yet. But as it comes down to crunch time with the time limit, you can kind of see where things were going with the finish. Everybody's cheering for Mike to get the airplane spin on Dory. So Mike fires up in the last 30 seconds, catches Dory off the ropes in a fireman's carry, and right as he goes to do the spin, the bell sounds for the time limit draw. At which point, I'm just now looking at my notes and I'm trying to figure out how I can say this without coming across like a racist. Let me just read you what I wrote in my notes and you can be the judge of it. A large black man in a hood hits the ring and jumps Mike Rotunda. Did I just run off like 80% of the audience with that one singular comment? I'm just reporting on what I saw. No joke. That's what happened. Tony referred to him as, quote, the Black Assassin, unquote. And he was indeed black. And he was attempting some kind of assassination on Mike Rotunda here, him and Dory. I'm guessing this was an extension from a series of angles they were shooting down in Florida at the time. I mean, it kind of looked like Bill Tabb under a hood. His face was never revealed. And they got run off by some of the underneath baby faces, so it didn't overstay its welcome. It was a very good TV match, followed by a very strange afterbirth. But like I noted with the TV match, very old school, both guys worked hard, the people were into it by the end. And that's kind of amazing when you really think about it for a second. Mike Rotunda and Dory Funk Jr., two guys that have not been on the show regularly. In the case of Dory, I don't think we've ever seen him make a physical appearance on the studio shows. And these guys managed to get the people on board with it by the end. Just by doing basic, simple pro wrestling. Again, I echo it to all the AEW marks. This shit doesn't have to be hard. Take this match as a noted example. When you simplify your shit and you use logic to put a match together, you can virtually get anybody to care. A casual fan could look at this and understand what's going on. You don't need to sodomize someone with a rusty fishing hook or ram a flagpole down a guy's throat. Just have two guys go out there and fucking wrestle. Have one distinguishable face, one distinguishable heel, give it time, and just let them go. No mid-match angles, no run-ins, no goofy comedy. Don't have the guys kick out of each other's finish 70 times in a row. Don't do crazy high spots or aerial stunts for the sake of it. By God, you almost think the shit could be that easy. These people figured it out. So from there, we had the greatest match of all time. Dory Funk versus Mike Rotunda was a Class A example of a technical masterpiece. But even that pales in comparison to the next match. J.J. Dillon versus Alan Martin. What Dark Journey referred to as a warm-up match for the Horseman's manager. And yes, Dark Journey spoke here. She didn't do a halfway bad job. It was probably better than every Baby Doll promo I ever heard throughout 1986. And they kind of let the cat out of the bag earlier when they showed JJ wearing wrestling trunks. Shouldn't have been a surprise that he was going to end up working a match. But he surely didn't disappoint in the delivery of it. By the way, I want to sidetrack for a minute here. J.J. Dillon at this moment. Do you know how old he is without looking it up? He is 81. 81 years old. Which means, if my math is correct, at the time he was wrestling here in 1987, hold on, I'm doing math in my head. He was 46. No, 45. Right? Yes, 45. Yeah, I can do mental math. I went to the school of Steiner, so I would know. That's crazy, though. Now, yes, he was a legit pro wrestler back in his heyday. He broke into the business in his late 20s, so, he had been around the block for a while. He'd been working the manager role for a period of time, though, so he wasn't consistently in the ring wrestling by this point in his career. You look at his body and you're like, probably looked like he hadn't been hitting the gym all that religiously. Nor the tanning bed. He was glistening under those bright lights. When the studio jobbers have a better tan than you do, probably not a good sign. God love him, though. JJ is the fucking man. He went out there and had a wrestling clinic with this Alan Martin fella, doing the signature Flair strut, which I think legitimately made Tully, Arn, Luger, and Flair mark out on the floor. They were all at ringside for this, and when JJ went to do the strut, they were practically in tears laughing. They probably broke kayfabe. I would not be surprised. I was also laughing for the majority of this, as we get the classic heat spot where Martin hits a few basic takeovers on JJ. So, of course, JJ, as a means of stalling, has to go over to the corner to towel off. I just thought, what a douche. And of course, you got the numbers game working against Martin here. So when he dumps him out to the floor, the rest of the Horsemen are there to stomp a mud hole in him, including Dark Journey, who... I can't even say she slapped Alan Martin in the face. She thumped him on the forehead. And she was so proud of this. She thumped Martin's head, and she was overcome with joy. Probably the first time she ever hit a man in her entire life. It was a career accomplishment for Dark Journey at this moment. She peaked with that move. A flick to the forehead. Meanwhile, we get the greatest finishing sequence of all time. This is fucking legendary and should go into the archives of all-time wrestling moments. JJ, in sequential order, then picks up Martin to hit the following moves. A horribly botched slingshot suplex where he nearly dropped Martin on his head. Made even better by the fact that when he bounced off the ropes, he completely lost control of him, and Martin almost got launched into the stratosphere. And JJ was so proud of this, by the way, that he gave the Horsemen the thumbs up. And they all gave him one back. And David Crockett simply goes, "He did it." Followed by JJ immediately hitting a gourd buster, which is actually pretty decent looking. That one wasn't bad. Then following it up with the world's worst torture rack, where JJ was so blown up trying to hoist this guy over his shoulder, I think he just gave up mid-move and dropped the guy straight onto his spine. And because JJ had not already embarrassed himself enough, he then decided, I'm going to win with the figure four. And I want to be kind when I say he attempted to apply this hold. He tried something resembling a figure four, but not quite. Alan Martin just gave up anyway. And then just to make sure everybody knew that JJ was the biggest jackass of all time, the Horsemen all came into the ring and hoisted him up in the air like he had just won the World Heavyweight title. I concluded with the following. This was a 5-star squash. I don't give a fuck what anybody says. And this may turn out to be the best moment in wrestling from 1987. J.J. Dillon's TV squash with Alan Martin from the July 4th episode on the Saturday Night Superstation. A classic moment that I will relive over and over again whenever I'm in a bad mood. If I'm having a rotten day, I promise you, I can go back and rewatch this segment over and over again, and I will come out feeling better. It's just a shame that Paul Ellering's tune-up match with Cougar Jay was nowhere near this level of awesome. The only thing that Ellering had going in his favor here was that he was in much better ring shape than JJ was. And during this 45-second squash, Ellering proceeded to do the following. Nearly dropped Jay on his head and neck attempting a military press. Would have killed the guy instantly. He had a neck breaker, and then he did a semi-botched running lariat off the ropes where he barely made contact with the guy but still somehow pinned him. Dusty was also out on the floor for Christ knows what reason. I guess because he needed to get himself involved on the show physically in some capacity. So he said, fuck it, I'm going out there with Paul and playing cheerleader. He contributed nothing else. And it was at this point in the show where we had our third Barry Switzer plug for the Bash Tour. Now, I had failed to mention the two previous ones, but by the time the third one rolled around, here's how my mindset quickly changed. First time, Barry Switzer plug. Okay, whatever. We've seen the same clip a million times before. Second time, same Barry Switzer plug. Okay. Now they're starting to push my buttons a little bit. By the third time they aired the same pre-tape, I loudly stood up and screamed, "Fuck you, Barry!" to the top of my lungs. I was done with this clown. I never wanted to see or hear the name Barry Switzer ever again. This was the one thing on the show that just sent me over the edge. I can look past all the bad squashes or the nonsensical promos, but 3 Barry Switzer plugs for the Bash Tour. I had enough. I couldn't take it. I was done. In fact, I was so over it, when I saw the next segment was a Paul Jones promo, I was relieved. I said, surely anything could be better, right? Well, I don't know about all that. This was still kind of terrible. The only thing I really got out of this was Paul saying that he'll be surrounded by the following names on the Bash Tour, the men that will carry Paul Jones to victory. And among those names were Ivan Koloff, Vedimir Petrov, the Raging Bull, and the Barbarian. Those were the guys that were going to rise to the top on the 1987 Bash Tour. Ivan Koloff, Vladimir Petrov, Manny Fernandez, and the Barbarian. Some tells me that's a lackluster roster of guys. Beyond that, though, I have no clue what the fuck he was rambling on about. Something about Dusty, I have no idea. And then we went to the ring for Ivan Koloff versus Hal Moore. First off, I sighed. We were an hour and 7 minutes into this fucking show, and I'm watching Ivan Koloff versus Hal Moore. You know, now that I think of it, this was the point where I got sent over the edge. The Barry Switzer skits were the tipping point. But when I saw Ivan Koloff versus Hal Moore, that is when I flipped over my computer and jumped down a flight of stairs. Sadly, the ground broke my fall. So when I came back in the room a couple minutes later, Ivan 1 was something. Thank God it was short. And from there, we cut to Tony Schiavone for an update on Dr. Death Steve Williams. An angle that I believe they showed several weeks back on TV, where Dick Murdoch had attacked and injured the arm of Dr. Death and put him out of commission. So he's on the road to recovery, and he makes it known that he is coming for Big Bubba Rogers? Excuse me? All right then. Captain Redneck attacked my arm and put me on the shelf for months. I'm so mad. I'm going to get my revenge on Big Bubba. Fuck that guy in particular. I don't know. In any case, he was at the gym training. An actual training session where it looked like he was doing the work. Unlike that MJF Adam Cole skit that just sucked. And he still had the cast on. But he was hitting the heavy weights and doing the workout thing. A very large physical specimen that Dr. Death was. Boy, was that guy intense. Now, the visual of seeing Barry Switzer there with him pissed me off. Wanted to drop kick him through my fucking TV monitor. We did get Jim Ross on camera very briefly, which was kind of cool. Good to see a young, perky JR. I really hope he's doing well right now. I know he's been dealing with some health complications lately. His commentary on that AEW show a while back was really hard to sit through. But, I heard he's taking time to heal, and that's good. You know, he's earned it at this point in his career. Hopefully he comes back and feels a lot better. So, after that quick update, we go back to the booth for a Ron Simmons interview. And They really didn't say all that much. His first major televised promo in Crockett Promotions. And it's mostly a promo where he puts over Dr. Death and says that if he needs somebody to watch his back, Ron will be there to lend him a hand. Okay, then. Not what I expected, but sure. At least we establish he's a babyface. And then we cut back to the booth after commercial for JJ and Luger. And completely at random, the Horsemen are going to be hosting their very own Win-A-Date contest in Philadelphia. JJ says that there are 3 lucky ladies that are going to get the opportunity to win a date with Luger, where they'll have the esteemed pleasure of watching Lex Luger flex his biceps in front of them for an entire evening. And they'll fawn over him. Sure, why not? The Horsemen are partygoers. That sounds like a good time. And meanwhile, Luger has his sights fixated on Wargames, as well as Nikita Koloff in the U.S. heavyweight belt. And he's also passionately angry and loud.
I'm pissed now!
All right, so I lied. Remember when I said the Ivan Koloff match was testing my patience on this show? At this point, we're now an hour and 15 minutes into the show. So what match should they decide to book but the Black Assassin versus Daryl Dalton? In other words, Bill Tab under a black hood versus another studio jobber who sucks in the ring and can't wrestle for shit. I was dying on the inside at this point. I think there was one singular fan in the studio that tried to start a boring chant. Everybody else just sat on their hands. Meanwhile, Tab did 100 moves in a row and finally won with the running lariat. Looked horrible, by the way. And then we cut to the booth for a Dory Funk Jr. promo, briefly putting over the Black Assassin. He also establishes that he's coming for Mike Rotundo in the Florida Heavyweight Championship. Guess we're back to now calling him Rotundo. In addition, he's also after, and I think this is a direct quote, the overgrown bear gas bag, Blackjack Mulligan. The overgrown bear gas bag. That's a new one. Haven't heard that insult ever. And the other guy he's going after is Kevin Sullivan, who we've also seen a few cameos of on these Crockett shows, but haven't seen him do much outside some of the Crockett Cup matches. But those are the men that Dory is targeting on the 87 Bash Tour. Cool. Speaking of Mike Rotundo, he's got a thing or two to say about that Dory Funk challenge. He will also be on the Bash Tour. He does not care where the venue is. If Dory wants the belt, he's going to have to meet Mike in the ring and pry it from his cold, dead hands. So I presume challenge accepted. For the record, I still prefer heel Mike Rotunda over babyface Rotunda. And no, IRS doesn't count. Nor does M Wall Street. So then we go to the ring for Tully Blanchard versus Trent Knight, a TV title match, because we all know Tully's a giving man. Wargames is coming up. It is the 1987 Bash Tour, but damn it all, I'm a fighting champion. So I'll put the title on the line the same night I have to wrestle in the Omni, inside one of the most dangerous matches of all time. That's how much of a heel I am. And if there's one thing Tully doesn't appreciate, it's men refusing to shake his hand before the initial lockup. Trent wasn't having any of Tully's sportsmanship, so Tully said, "All right, motherfucker, I'll just plant your face into the ring mat as hard as possible." At which point the onslaught continued for a while until Tully finally put the poor bastard away with a slingshot. And I can confirm 100%. This slingshot was much better than JJ's. Hard to believe, I know. And then we had a great closing promo from Tully. He was mocking Dusty for coming out earlier and saying, "I want my money, I want my money." Tully here to remind Dusty that it's Tully's money because he beat Big Dust. Beat him fair and square in the middle of the ring on his own turf. The reason Dusty lost is because he jumped the gun and lost his composure. That's on Dusty. But here we are, and now Jim Crockett has forced Tully into putting his title on the line again, this time in a match surrounded by barbed wire. $100,000 on the line, risking life and limb for it. And apparently, as we found out here in the final few seconds of the show, what is also going to be a ladder match? When the fuck did that become a thing? Did I hear that incorrectly? Or did Tully say that the money is going to be hanging above the ring and both guys have to climb up the ladder to retrieve it? I guess that's part of the stipulation. Got me. I don't ever recall NWA doing ladder matches. I thought those were WWF specialties. But maybe the money is just the icing on the cake. It's probably pinfall submission for the title, and then somebody has to climb up and grab the money above the ring or something. In any case, it's Tully's money. And he just wants to reaffirm that. But, yeah, this show is pretty damn great. Couple bumps in the road along the way, but this one came off like a top shelf program. I was getting a little fatigued in the last half hour, and Barry Switzer can go fuck himself. But between that JJ match and the Dory Funk Mike Rotunda clinic, on top of all the other great promo material we got this week, it was a fun watch. I didn't even realize until after the show was over, no on-screen appearances from the Midnight Express. They were completely absent from the program. And it was still fantastic. It is still a peak period in '87 for the NWA. You know, the Bash Tour did great business for them. The talents on the various cards were off the charts at this point. It was still a really hot period for the business. They just couldn't keep that momentum going after the fact long term. Because after the summer is over, man, those cracks I referenced last time, you're going to start to see them open up more and more as we approach '88. It wasn't all bad at first, but things quickly went off the rails faster than you can probably imagine. So anyway, y'all ready for another subpar edition of World Class? These shows are, well, it's always something, isn't it? You got programs like AEW Dynamite, where it's just nonstop 2 hours of chaos every week. You hardly ever know what's going on half the time. It's just random spontaneous shit happening all at once. You got Crockett, where the shows range anywhere from great to bad, depending on the star power and whether or not they have anything big planned for the shows. WWE, you basically got one major story carrying the entire company on its back, and everything else is just kind of there to fill the void. And then there's World Class, which is somewhere in the middle. It's hard to even really describe these programs. They're not horrible, but God, are they very formulaic. You know, for all the shit I give AEW about trying to always cram in so much Crash TV stuff every week, sometimes I watch these World Class shows and think, boy, it'd be nice to maybe have a big angle or something to keep me from falling asleep. You know, occasionally we get programs like the one a few weeks ago where you had that Freebirds Von Erich brawl, and The penalty box match with Stella May and Jimmy Garvin doing that great comedy bit on the floor. Like, it's not to say that they ever stray away from doing over-the-edge material, but I mean, you kind of fall into a pattern where it just, you watch several weeks and it doesn't seem like nothing happens. Out of a 45-minute program, you get maybe 5 to 10 minutes of real noteworthy material, and then you're left with like 30 to 35 minutes of just stuff. The shows are so lifeless sometimes. I mean, this is another one of those episodes. It's like, I mean, they're trying to do some stuff with the new talent they brought in. Gino's great. I like everything they're doing with his segments. But for every Gino segment, you've also got the rock and roll Buck Zumhoofs of the world, the fucking missing links and the killer cons, where it looks like two guys wrestling underwater most of the time. You know, on top of that, you got the Freebirds and the Von Erichs floating around doing their thing. Whether or not they're feuding with each other on television or split up doing separate things, I don't know, it's kind of sporadic. But I think I'm starting to see why the bottom fell out once they withdrew from the National Wrestling Alliance in '86. Because right now, we're still technically in the boom period. But the more I watch this show every week, it's so obvious they've got one central rivalry carrying the entire company, and then everything else is, all right, we'll fill the gaps here and there with the middle card guys and see where it lands. So it is kind of like watching WWE in a lot of ways. The Freebirds Von Erich story is the current bloodline story of modern wrestling, and then you got the rest of the card to fill out somewhere in between. And once I kind of run down this week's card, you'll see what I'm talking about with things being very formulaic and dry. First, I'll briefly touch on this. Their encore presentation this week was the replay of the Kevin and Mike Von Erich versus Terry Gordy Buddy Roberts match from, was it 2 weeks ago? 3 weeks? No, it was recent. And, this is mostly to keep fresh on people's minds that the six-man belts are still being held up, promoting the upcoming Freebirds Von Erich showdown for later on. I don't know if they've actually announced a time or a date for that match yet. It also really didn't tie in with this show, since the main event featured one of the Von Erichs, and none of the Freebirds were involved in that match. But, there you have it. The first actual match this week was a Gino Hernandez-George Weingroff match. And of course, Gino's been one of the sole highlights of this program in the last month or so. Ever since the return to Texas Stadium, they've been giving that guy the rocket ship push to the main event. And he's certainly been taking the ball and running with it. His promos have been off the charts great. His matches are always entertaining. You know, and he's great with the subtle things that make his matches so valuable, especially as a heel. Just simple things like taking an atomic drop during the comeback from Weingroff, and he's selling it like somebody gave him the world's worst propeller wedgie, walking around like he's got a giant 10-foot pole wedged up his ass. Some people would call it overselling to the point of being over the top. Maybe. I mean, it worked with Gino because of the gimmick. I think the facials are what makes his matches so great. It looks like he finally modified his finish, too. He was using the double axe elbow from the middle rope, but now it looks like he's modified it to some variation of the Macho Man elbow drop, only instead he's coming down backwards instead of forwards. It is a little odd, but I mean, at least he looks over his shoulder before actually executing the move. Unlike what everybody else does today, where they just do blind leaps of faith and then hope their opponent is standing there to catch them when they come down. But it was a fine squash. Short and sweet. Then we had Wild Bill Irwin and Kelly Kiniski versus Chief Joel Strongbow and Rock and Roll Buck Zumhoff. Yeah, that's a cast of characters. Remember when I was referring to the lackluster talent pool that World Class had in the mid-card around this point? This match, this is like 50% of their mid-card division in 1984. Bill Irwin, Kelly Kiniski, Jules Strongbow, and Buck Zumhoff. Not the strongest collection of talent. Not that it was a bad match or anything. It was actually kind of fun. You know, especially in the early goings when Strongbow was in there chopping the shit out of the heels and firing up the crowd. I would say that everything was going moderately well right until the point that Zumhoff tagged in for the first time. Then everything kind of went to shit in a hurry. When I tell you that he more or less missed about 5 or 6 punches during the brief flurry he had, that's no exaggeration. He tags in, and as he goes after Kiniski, I think he attempted about 7 or 8 punches. At least 5 of them came nowhere close to actually making contact with Kiniski. Now, he did make up for it with a cool-looking monkey flip counter where he landed on his feet and then hit a drop kick. That at least looked good. But they kept the action moving along. Wasn't a lot of downtime, which kept the crowd more invested. And that's a good thing. It was weird hearing people chant, "Rock and roll." I was half expecting Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson to make a run in at some point. But it all ends up breaking down at the end. They did a miscue spot where Zumhoff had Kiniski in the abdominal stretch. And I'm not entirely sure what they were going for here, but somehow Irwin came off the middle rope and accidentally hit Kiniski with a double axe handle. I guess Zumhoff was intended to shift Kiniski's body to the left so he could block the attack, but it was a little wonky in execution. But of course, that allowed for Zumhoff to get the pin on Kiniski while Strongbow fought off Irwin. Nice little babyface win. Crowd dug it. I know Buck Zumhoff is one of those stable talents in Dallas for the next year or so him getting the win here wasn't all that shocking. I mean, I actually forgot the last thing he did on television. He's worked a couple squashes here and there, but I totally forgot about the guy. He came in hot. I remember that. Had a boombox with him when he first showed up. I mean, he may have worked some matches with the Iceman in tag settings. I actually think that's where he ends up going back to. Don't quote me on that, though. I mean, my memories of rock and roll Buck Zumhoff are almost non-existent. At least that match was more notable than the next one. Here's everything I wrote down about the next squash. Killer Khan versus Chick Donovan. It went 2 minutes. Khan worked over Chick's tape knee the entire time and then won via something. And I actually wrote that down. I had no idea how they calculated the finish. I think it was a ref stoppage. Anyway, so Khan's beating on Donovan afterwards until outruns Kevin Von Erich to make the save. Wearing the following clothing items: a white button up top, bootcut jeans, and bare feet. A wardrobe malfunction of epic proportions. Unless you were born in the 1970s and hung out with the hippie crew, there's no excuse to be wearing straight-cut leg jeans with no shoes or socks. And I know that was Kevin's gimmick, wrestling without shoes on. But the bare feet with the jeans, no. Major turnoff. They also spent time milking the drama of Donovan's leg injury. That's where some of the locker room babyfaces came out to attend to him, and he was down selling. He actually did a moderately decent job selling it, but just a basic little heat angle for Khan. Really nothing else to add to it. And then for our TV main event, another case of them drawing 2 random top heel names and 2 random top babyface names out of a hat and saying, sure, why not? We'll go with that. It's Chris Adams and Kerry Von Erich versus The Missing Link and Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin. And I'll talk about the match momentarily, but I must first point out the ringside visual. The fan cam footage came in handy at the Sportatorium this week. I thought the bloody Michael Hayes baby doll was a legendary sight to behold. This lady went out of her way to devise whatever this contraption was. But holy cow, was it awesome. I'm not shitting you when I say this. She is holding what appears to be a shoebox or some type of construction paperboard design that reads Stella May on the back of it. And then glued on the board is a toy truck, a girl baby doll that I believe was supposed to be Stella, and I think there was also an air horn attached. That is pretty goddamn epic. We knew Stella's semi-truck was the single reason her gimmick got over. This elderly woman, she took that and ran with it. That wasn't even the best part of the segment either. The best part of the match was actually the very first thing that happened, as Jimmy Garvin began to channel his inner Buff Bagwell to try and have a pose down with Kerry. Poor choice. As Kerry responds by going, "All right, dude, you want to flex your arms in me? I'll just pick you up and give you a delayed military press," followed by an even more impressive bicep pose. And that alone was enough for Garvin to roll out to the floor and call a timeout. One press slam. Garvin had enough. The other thing I noted about this match was the spot where Missing Link tags in for the first time. Now, we all know Link's go-to offense is the headbutt. It's like 95% of the guy's move arsenal. Well, he hits a series of headbutts to Adams here during the heat. But I did note that one of his first spots was grabbing Adams by the crotch area and pulling his tights up so he could headbutt him in the gut. I just think to myself, what exactly is the thought process when you do a move like that? Do you just hope that when you reach out, you don't accidentally grab the guy's junk? I'd be a little tentative to put my hands in that area. I mean, pro wrestling already has a lot of suspect qualities to it. Mostly in the fact that it's half-naked, sweaty men rolling around on each other. But once you start grabbing at the genitals, it's hard to defend the product at that point. Pro wrestling already gets a bad reputation to begin with, and in that case, it's hard to argue against it. But then we get the finish. They try to do a heat spot where Adams goes to suplex Garvin from the ring apron, but Precious is supposed to reach in to trip him up. Here, well, they attempted the spot. Problem was Precious just sort of grabbed and held Chris's ankle until basically Chris took his own phantom bump. And then when David Manning went to count the 3, it wasn't really clear what count he was on. So Bill Mercer called a 3 count when I think David was only on 2. And then I could have sworn he tapped him out like 2 more times after that. So I think it was a 4 count. And it looked like Kerry may have been intended to break up the fall, but for whatever reason he didn't. And then after the bell, while the heels are beating up Adams and trying to get their heat back, Stella May runs out from the back and tries to throw Precious out of the ring so she can go after Garvin. In this case, she threw Precious down to the ring mat, and Precious kind of rolled herself under the bottom rope. And then Stella punched Garvin in the face 1 time, and then she powdered. It's one of those wacky storylines where if you're a smart fan watching, you're probably thinking, how come Stella is managing to break through ring security every week on this show? It's been like 3 or 4 weeks of this nonstop. She runs out from the back. Nobody's there to chase her off. She goes right after Garvin and continually gets in clean shots on him before Garvin goes running like a coward. It's the same thing every week. don't you think after maybe 1 or 2 weeks, somebody would say, maybe we ought to keep an eye on that Stella Mae French, just to make sure she doesn't get involved in too many of Jimmy's segments anymore? Nope. She's still out there running around and making him look like a jackass. I mean, it's hilarious. But you also start to wonder, is security just asleep at the wheel for those shows? Or do they just have it in for Jimmy Garvin? I don't know. It is quite the conspiracy theory if you think about it. All in all, sort of a middle-of-the-road Dallas taping. A couple fun things on the card, but there wasn't much happening in terms of major story development. Like I said at the top, I mean, you could definitely see them trying to focus on some of the newer talent and build up some of the storylines other than just going back to the well yet again with the same Freebirds Von Erich stuff. So there's a little bit of variety. But, then the reality eventually kicks in that they don't have a whole lot to work with. There is some talent there, but it's not a very deep roster if you really analyze it. And while things are good now in terms of business, we're only about a year or so out from when things really take a turn for the worse. I think once 86 rolls around, that's where we really start to see the shows falter. But there you have that. And that'll wrap up the show for this week. So for Monday, it looks like we'll have the standard regular show. We'll have the SmackDown report, the Collision report, and the Retro Raw report. No pay-per-view events coming up this weekend, so goody goody. It is a very laid-back Saturday and Sunday for me, which I could use, so I'll take it. In the meantime, thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure you check out the show in the next coming weeks, and have a good one. Take care. Peace out.